This is Studio 809.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Outdoors Hiking Bob podcast. I am your host, Hiking Bob Falcone, and you can find me and everything you want to know or don't want to know or curious about at hikingbob.com, which has links to social media, my newspaper columns in a variety of locations. We'll talk about that in a minute. The other podcasts we've done, my photography website, you can contact me there. You can subscribe to my newsletter. Everything is at hikingbob.com. One-stop shopping. Just go there and check it out. Joining me today is my co-host after a little bit of an absence, Kevin Wild Westendorf. Hi, Kevin.
Hey everyone, it's Wild Westendorf here. Kevin, you can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Wild Westendorf and at my website, wildwestendorf.com.
Well, Kevin, thanks for being here. I know you're a little under the weather, so we're doing this on Zoom. So hopefully it's just a minor thing. Kevin, some exciting news. And if you follow me on the podcast and on social media, people have probably already seen this, and I'm not going to go over the whole story. If you go back and look at the podcast right before this, it's about a whole, I don't know, Kevin, what's about 10 minutes long, if it's even that long. I talked about how The Independent, where I was writing columns for as a freelancer, suddenly and abruptly was sold to another owner. Everybody who worked there was fired. The good news is the Pikes Peak Bulletin, which is based out of Manitou Springs, right next door to us here, in Colorado Springs, but they are expanding their reach into, up Butte Pass and into downtown Colorado Springs. They got on with me and they said, hey, we'd love to have your stuff. I had a brief phone call with their editor-in-chief and bam, we're there. And my first column was published there last Friday. I will be there in the first and third weeks of the month. So watch for those. And of course, I'll put them on my social media, my newsletter, and all that kind of stuff. But super happy and appreciative to the good folks at the Pikes Peak Bulletin for bringing me on. They publish weekly. I'll just be on every first and third week. And as opposed to the Gazette, which is owned by a billionaire, and the last couple of owners of the Indy owned by millionaires, this is owned by a few hardworking people who are trying to make ends meet with selling subscriptions. So subscribe if you don't mind. And ads, and they do real nice work, and they've brought on some pretty good people who have also, like me, from the Indy and went over there. So pretty happy with that. So appreciative to them. So you'll see my columns coming from there. It's going to be a lot of the same stuff I shouldn't say same stuff. I'm not repeating things, but it's going to be a lot of the same kind of stuff that I've been doing for the last bunch of years. Maybe it'll be about trails one day, or maybe the politics of recreation. I'm not going to get into general politics, or maybe safety tips, or all that kind of stuff. The same kind of stuff I was doing before. It's just going to continue on at a new place. So I'm super, super excited about that, and really appreciative towards the bulletin for inviting me over there, and happy to be doing it. So that's really the big exciting news. And as of a couple of days ago, I had been retired from the fire department, from the fire service, for 10 years now. Kevin, I don't know if you can believe it's been 10 years since I retired, but holy cow, as that 10 years blew by.
Oh, it's flown by, and you say you've been retired, but you haven't actually stopped working.
I'm only retired in the fact that I get a pension check. Other than that, I don't think I'm retired at all.
Because I know a bunch of people who have retired, and they might volunteer here and there occasionally, like at the food bank or something.
Right.
But you have been on boards for the city and county, I think the state too.
Yeah.
And you have done this newsletter, the thing for your publication. I don't know anyone else who has retired and has been as busy as you have been.
I like to think of what keeps me in my youthful good looks and my girlish figure. I don't know that to be a fact at all. But anyway, yeah, so 10 years retired as a firefighter after a 38-year career. So I can't even believe it was that long. But in any case, that's what's happened there. So, Kevin, a lot of things going on around the world, I guess is the best way to put it. And like I said, a couple minutes ago, this isn't a political show. I'm not here to harp on politics or anything like that. But, we do talk about the politics that affects outdoor recreation. And one of the things that's been a kind of a common theme, and it's hard to avoid it, it's the 500-pound gorilla in the room, is that the federal government has undergone some drastic and pretty severe budget cuts. It has resulted in a lot of people losing their jobs. A lot of these people were pretty essential to keeping national parks and U.S. forest operating, especially during the peak summer months. A lot of them were seasonal positions that either people were fired from or they're just not going to be hired, and it goes back and forth. Courts have ruled in general that no, you can't really do that, but in the meantime, they brought people back and then told them, sit in your office and don't do anything. So now as opposed to not paying people and not having them, we're paying people to not do anything. In my opinion, a ridiculous state of affairs, and certainly no way to be running a government. But this is these are the people that we elected, and this is what we get. But the bigger news that just came out was the federal budget for 2026 has been proposed, and in it there is a $1 billion with a B dollar cut proposed to the National Park Service. Basically, that's a little less than half of the entire National Park Service budget, who has already not had enough money to do anything. And the way that they're proposing that this be managed is that some National Park Service sites, now not national parks, there's 63, 64 of those, but some of the National Park Service sites, which could include national monuments, national historic sites, a variety of other things, just be turned over to the state that they're in for them to manage. A couple of problems with that. One is, has anybody asked the states if they want it? Has anybody asked the states if they have the money to manage those things? And how will a state manage a national historical site that's been under the purview of the National Park Service? Will they protect it like the National Park Service protects things? Will the same rules apply that apply when it's under the National Park Service protection? If the state decides they can't handle it, will they sell it off, abandon it, destroy it? What will they do? There's no protections in place. Overall, I think really poor way of doing things. There was nobody screaming to get rid of the National Park Service. There was nobody in the public that was screaming that the Park Service should be cut in half. There was nobody in the public, I mean, I'm sure there's some nutcase someplace, screaming that there was too much money being spent at the National Park Service. It's considered a national treasure. It's considered a great national experiment. It's one of the best things we do. And this is what's been chosen to be drastically affected. I think it's a terrible idea. I wonder if even in today's political climate where one party seems to be on board and one does not, if these kind of cuts will actually survive or if there will be some pushback to not allow this to happen. I don't know. I know what I hope will happen, which is we're not going to do this. But right now, in a society where most politicians don't seem to have a set of cojones worth a darn to say anything, I'm not confident that the National Park Service is going to survive this. And even if it does, with court cases that will inevitably come out of it, the problem is those things take a while and the damage will continue to be done. And by the time a court may say, no, you can't do that, you have to reinstate it, how much damage is done that you now have to spend even more money to recover from. So I don't know what's going to happen there. It's a pretty rotten set of circumstances. And again, like I said, the only reason why we're bringing up politics is this directly affects the topic of this podcast, which is outdoor recreation. And
yeah.
If you think I'm wrong about this, so you're welcome to write me a letter. But if you're going to go and be insulting, then keep your letters home or I'm just going to trash them. But in any case, I don't know, Kevin. I think I know how you're going to feel about this. Because I think you and I are pretty much on the same page, but you're definitely not committed to agreeing with me. But what do you think?
Oh, it's frustrating because everything is political in the sense of just life, like every choice you make, blah blah blah. But what's frustrating is I remember years ago, so I don't have an updated number, and I'm not gonna remember the right number. But years ago, there was a big thing about how the national parks were billions of dollars underfunded. They had billions, with a B, of dollars of projects that needed to be done to improve the parks, to maintain them, just to maintain them. So it's really frustrating to see this. I get making smart cuts to the budget, but like we talked about, I think the last time I was on this show, how there's just slashing and slashing and slashing. So there's nothing smart about this. You know, you can have a household budget and it's like deciding, okay, we're going to slash the budget for toilet paper. Okay, that's going to save you a few bucks a month, but that's not a smart cut to make
Well,
because
and
you need toilet paper. Like,
you don't decide you're not going to buy any toilet paper. You might decide that maybe I'll buy smaller bundles at a time, or maybe a slightly less expensive thing. But you don't
yeah,
say
yeah,
toilet paper is expensive. We're just going to do without it. That's not how you do things, right?
exactly. And I remember when there was the government shutdown a few years ago, and so the state of Colorado stepped in to help operate Rocky Mountain. And most states just don't have the budget to do that long term. And so I was really glad that Rocky Mountain was able to get that help. But like we saw, and like I talked about the last time I was on the show was in Joshua Tree. There was tons of damage, tons of vandalism. There was just no resources available when the government shut down then. So cutting down resources even more now, I want to trust the courts to do the right thing, but we've already seen that some courts have said certain things and the government is just saying like, okay, no. So that's also really frustrating and scary. Like it's scary. Also, I don't know what kind of impact this is going to have on our national forest system, our BLM lands, our like it's like it's going to be widespread damage. And like you said, even if courts are able to say, no, you actually have to reinstate certain parts of it, of the budget or whatever, the damage could be done. And that's scary.
Yeah, I don't know. I hate to even look at my email every morning and see what the next stupid thing is that the government comes up with. We'll have to see how this all shakes out. My concern is that a lot of these things, as they work their way through the court system, are not going to survive the cuts that have happened. But the problem is, like I said, damage is going to get done, and then how do you claw your way back when you were barely keeping up with things to begin with? So pretty distressing. Let's just hope for the best that cooler heads prevail. And this is already seeing a little bit of bipartisan pushback because this affects virtually every state in the union, and everybody of every walk of life enjoys the national parks and the National Park Service sites. Again, we're not talking about the 63, 64 national parks per se, but a lot of the smaller sites.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And I do understand to a degree that those cost money to maintain, but they were adopted into the Park Service because they're protecting or honoring or conserving something for a reason. And there's a process that's unbelievable that has to happen. So to just say, well, we just don't want to do that anymore, just you're not respecting the whole process of how they got there to begin with.
And our listeners can't see this, but behind me on Zoom is Hot Springs National Park, or it's the town of Hot Springs and Arkansas, but the downtown area is the national park, and it's one of the first ones to be created, and it's tiny. I mean, it is tiny, tiny, but it's beautiful. It's just like there's a ton of history because it's more of a national park because of the history rather than the landscape like you would find in national parks in the West. But I think it's so important to preserve that history, whether it's beautiful landscapes with like grand vistas or if it's a national monument site. Back in 2023, I went to Charleston and we went to I'm having a brain fart right now. I'm trying to remember the island that we went to, but it's where the Civil War started. And that's a national monument site. And I think that stuff is so important, like in terms of creation of our country, the the history, all the stuff that we've gone through. There's even a national monument that is near here that is focused on the concentration camps that we created in World War II for the Japanese. Like, I think even the ugly parts of our history are important to recognize and remember, and to kind of take away the funding and the support, the resources for that stuff. Because a lot of people think of National Parks Service as mountains and canyons, like, but there's just a massive amount of history that I think is really, really important to save and remember.
I agree. I'm thinking about Flores and Fossil Bed National Monument, which is the nearest National Park Service site to Colorado Springs here. It's a national monument. It's preserving, there's some history in there, and is also preserving these petrified, fossilized trees that go back a bazillion years. I think that, typically national monuments are created by a president because he has, under the Antiquities Act, can declare something a national monument. And those have been a target because the argument is if one president creates it, another one can uncreate it. That one is a little different because it did require, like a National Park Service site does, a national park does, an act of Congress, because at the time Flores and Fossil Beds was created, they had to buy property to make it a national park, a national monument, bring it into the National Park Service. And a president is not allowed to, how do I want to put it? A president's not allowed to spend money on his own. So while at the time President Nixon could have said, I want to make this a national monument, the government didn't own the property. So you had to have Congress budget money to buy the land so that they could make it into a national monument. It's a little unknown quirk of thing, or a little rarely ever used thing. So typically when they make a national monument, it's already land the government owns, and the president just says, I want to make this into a national monument, and there's criteria there. But you have to wonder about a place like Flores and Fossil Beds. It's a fairly small national monument, but it's still a local treasure, and people go hiking there. I go hiking there and snowshoe in there, and it's got
Yes, great. Yeah.
that historical. It's an official dark sky location. It's got the old ranch there, and it's a beautiful spot. But it's fairly small. It has a tiny little staff. Who knows what's going to happen there? We'll just have to ride it out. But let's hope that cooler heads somewhere sooner, hopefully more sooner than later, prevail, and we come out of this without losing too much ground.
And I wanted to make a quick little point about wilderness areas, because I believe those also require an act of Congress to make.
They do.
And wilderness areas, there's a bunch of them here in Colorado, like along with the rest of the states. But I think it's so important, because I did see something else in the news about how they opened up millions of acres of land in Utah for drilling and oil and stuff. And it's just kind of, there has to be a balance. And I feel like we're messing up that balance really bad right now. And so, yeah, it's just going to be a wait and see thing.
A lot of arguments been made that they're doing this to get energy independence for the country, but for the last bunch of years, we've exported more oil than we've imported. So I think we're fairly, at least on the right side of whether we're completely independent. I don't think you can, in a modern world, as we're finding out with tariffs and things like that, you cannot be 100% insulated from doing business with the rest of the world. It just doesn't work that way. But we are actually more energy independent than we were 20, 30 years ago. So I'm a little lost on things, but we'll see what happens. Cross your fingers, folks. I'll try to keep everybody up to date on it. I know people don't want to hear about this because we're getting beaten the head over it in the news constantly about all these cuts. But I just want to tell you that this is what's happening to something that actually affects all of us here who care about outdoor recreation, want to go hiking. And again, not the national parks themselves, but it may affect a national monument near you that you may not be able to enjoy. Maybe a place you like going to, or a place you have on your bucket list to go visit that's going to be affected by this. Kevin, let's slide into another topic real quick. You and I have talked about this a lot, and I've constantly endorsed it, that when you're out hiking in the backcountry, especially where you may not be in cell phone range, which you can be in North Cheyenne Canyon Park here in Colorado Springs, and there's a lot of places there that have no cell phone coverage. You and I know about these places. You can be pretty close to town and not have cell phone coverage. So we've talked about having emergency locator beacons. I have a personal locator beacon. I think you use a Garmin. Use a Garmin or InReach, or do you use a Spot?
So I've got it's an
Okay,
emergency
you
locator
have a personal
beacon.
locator beacon like I have.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's those devices. We'll talk briefly about the difference between them. And then there's commercial devices like Garmin, InReach, and Spot devices. And getting into just real briefly, the difference is that the device I have and the device you have are made to send an SOS signal when you activate it. There are several components to the devices. There's a 400 megahertz radio that transmits a signal to the federally operated search and rescue satellites. The device has a GPS, so when it sends that signal, not only does it send your identifier so they know who you are, it sends your GPS location so they can home in on you pretty quickly. And it has an aircraft, the same type of VHF aircraft beacon like airplanes do when they crash, so that if you're, as often happens in canyons or in mountains, the GPS signal gets scrambled and the accuracy may be off. Instead of by 10 feet like it normally is, maybe off by a few hundred feet because the signal bounces. It happens. So it has 3 different devices built into it. Typically, they do not have any messaging capability. Well, when the search and rescue people get it, they don't know if it went off because you're injured, you're trapped, you're lost. So it makes it a little complicated for the search and rescue people. Who do we send? And they send everybody. Then there's the other devices, the Garmin InReach devices and the Spot devices. They operate strictly on satellite communications. They do not have a VHF transponder in them, so you can't home in on them with direction finding equipment. They do have a GPS that sends your GPS location, and they use, I think they use Iridium satellites, which are privately owned satellites. They typically connect with a cell phone so that you can message through them. You can send a message home once a day. Hey, I'm at such and such location, and all is good. And they're pretty nice because you can actually tell somebody when you activate the device what's wrong. So that helps search and rescue people. The problem is you pay less for the device. So like the device you and I have, they run around $300 or $400, but they're free to operate because they use government run systems. You can buy these Garmin InReaches and Spots typically maybe half the price, but you then have to pay a subscription fee to those companies, and they can be rather expensive, especially if you get all the add-ons with messaging and stuff like that. So they tend to be more expensive over time. My personal locator beacon, made by a company called ACR, the only thing I had to do was when it hit 7 years old, I had to get a new battery put in it and get it tested, which cost me about $100 and some odd dollars. I shipped it off to a marine place in Florida. They took it out, they replaced the battery, did a complete systems check on it, sent me the thing back. And every couple of years I have to re-register it with the federal government. So it takes this, no time. And that's free. They just want to make sure you still own it. So the idea is if I activate it, they have a phone number to call, which is typically my wife, and say, his beacon went off. Is he in the basement playing with it? Or is he actually out someplace? And she's going to say, well, he told me he was going to be hiking in such and such a location, which helps, of course, when they relay a message to search and rescue, go look in this location. Especially helpful if they're getting a GPS coordinates and want to make sure that everything is corresponding. Oh, and there is also signaling now that you can do with modern iPhones. I think iPhone 14s and above have that. Now, what's important to know about that is that it's extremely limited range. When I say range, geographical area. My personal locator beacon is good worldwide. Garmin InReaches, they are good worldwide. I do not believe the iPhones, their messaging capability is good worldwide. Number one.
Yeah, I believe it's North America only.
Right. So very limited. If you're in North America, you're fine. But if you're like me and you go other places, they're not. I was contacted, which often happens, by a company that wanted me to talk about their wonderful product on the podcast. Well, if you know the podcast, I don't talk about people's products. If you want to talk about your product on my podcast, you're welcome to buy advertising time. I'm not here to do that. I will talk to book authors about their books because typically their books are interesting or useful. I did a book review in my first column with the bulletin. I talked about 2 new guidebooks that came out. But typically, I'm not here to talk about your new snack that you came out with or your new wonderful, shirt that you came out with or your new wonderful pants. You want to talk about that on my podcast, you can buy advertising space and we'll be happy to talk about it. That's why there's ads that run at the beginning and end of this podcast. I'm not here to do an infomercial. I sometimes will make an exception. There was a while back when I talked about this new device for search and rescue, which they put on a helicopter or on an airplane, and it simulates a cell phone tower that if somebody's lost and their cell phone is on, they'll pick up their cell phone by flying over them with this device, and cell phone sees a cell phone tower and sends a signal, ping. I talked about that because that is a real game changer in the search and rescue thing. Plus, they're making it available to search and rescue operations, including one here in Colorado. So I talked about that because to me that was, hey, it's not an item that you're going to buy. I'm not selling you an item. It's an item that's, obviously a search and rescue organization is going to buy, or a sheriff's office is going to buy, or a fire department's going to buy. But it was a game changer in the search and rescue business. And then I was contacted by an organization not too long ago that said, we have this great new service that we're offering to people who have these Garmin inReachers or spots that will organize their rescue operation if their device goes off. And it was a little confusing to me. It was like, I went back and forth like, well, do they not need to subscribe to their Garmin service if they have your thing? Oh, no, they still need that. So they're paying for that and this, or their spot service. No, they need that and this. It was a little confusing, but then I asked, well, what about if you have just a regular personal locator beacon like I have? I said, well, it's not going to work with those because we need specific things. Okay. And then they followed up with, and anyway, the Coast Guard says that 98% of personal locator beacon activations are false alarms. And I sat there and go, that sounds a little unreasonable to me. But I didn't want to call anybody a liar. I hadn't looked into it. So I did it took 10 seconds to do a little research. And the Coast Guard kind of manages a number of things. Now, the classification of personal locator beacons carry, which you and I have, and a lot of people carry, is that they also are the same technology used in what they call emergency personal information. There's another thing called an EPIRB. They're also the same classifications of things that are carried on boats that are water activated. So if the boat sinks or capsizes and this device gets wet or becomes dislodged and lands in the water, it sends out a beacon. Well, this 98% false alarm thing is actually all of these devices together, not just personal locator beacons that you and I and hikers carry, number one. So that changes things. So when I'm not able to locate from the Coast Guard, if you pull the personal locator beacons out of that, how many of those are actually false alarms? So this company was kind of throwing shade saying, well, those devices, 98% of the time, there's false alarms. Maybe true or maybe not. But the Coast Guard report that said that was all these devices, waterborne devices, aircraft devices, personal locator beacons on land devices, all these together. They could be a number of reasons. And they even say in there, some of them are user error, which I'm going to guarantee is probably most of them. Some of them are improper installations. So the person doesn't install it in the boat right. It comes dislodged, gets wet, sets off a thing. So a lot of things can happen here with this 98% false alarm rate. So then I'm at this little conference, and there's a discussion about the effects of technology on outdoor recreation. And Kevin, you and I have talked about this a lot. People don't know how to read maps anymore because they have a thing on their phone. Like Cotrex, like Backcountry, like Onyx Backcountry, which I like to use, like All Trails, God forbid. Like all these different things are just mapping that they carry on their phones. Well, they're following it. Does anybody know how to read a map anymore? I know how to read a map because I started off with maps. Everybody should know how to read a map, but you can't. And I see people buy maps and they have no idea how to read them. You have to learn just like you learn anything else. GPSs. I use a GPS faithfully. You use a GPS. Everybody uses a GPS. We have them on our watches now, but you have to learn how to use them. So obviously, technology is changing things. And there was one person in this discussion he worked for one of these companies and talked about all the great things his devices do, which, I'm not saying he was wrong about any of that. The messaging thing is very important. Search and rescue groups are now kind of telling people, if you can afford it, buy an inReach or a spot with messaging because it helps us figure out what you need more. That is a perfectly valid thing to consider in your decision-making process, whether you buy a personal locator beacon like I have, or if you buy an inReach that you have to pay more for, but you have more capability. And then the same thing came up. Well, 98% of the time, those things are false alarms. So I asked him, well, are they really? And I said, did you really read that Coast Guard thing, or are you just repeating something you were told? Well, no, we just know that. And then we were just told that they're 98% of them are false. Well, I said, that's not really true because it encompasses every type of device in that classification. So then my question was, false alarms aren't because these things malfunction. Could be. False alarm because of user error, typically. Somebody activates the beacon by accident. Somebody activates the beacon with might not be really an emergency. You can't tell me that happens more because people have a personal locator beacon than because they have a Garmin inReach. It's user error, user error. So then my next question was, so how many Garmin inReach activations are false alarms? And how many spot device activations are false alarms? And nobody knows. You know why? Because they're a privately held company and they're not going to tell you how many are. My only point in this is, and it's not a debate over which device to get. You and I have talked about this, Kevin. Have some kind of device that you can signal for help when you're in an emergency and it's not your cell phone. Whether it's a personal locator beacon that you buy and you don't have to pay a service for, or whether it's a Garmin inReach or a Spot that you buy and you pay for a service and you can do two-way messaging. Whichever one you want to get, that's up to you. And you should have one of those devices in case of an emergency. What I didn't like, what made me a little upset, was the spreading of this questionable statistic that makes one side look bad, but you're not sharing information on the other side. Well, how many of your devices have false alarms? And how many of those are user error, which is going to, user error is user error. So it's going to be the same, I think. Now, it could be less. It could be that maybe only 75% of the activations on a commercial device are false alarms. I don't know. You know why we don't know? They're not telling you. Maybe it's 99.9% of the activations on a commercial device are false alarms. We don't know because they're not telling you. The Coast Guard operates the other system. They have to tell you. They're federally funded public operation. They have to give you all these details. What I'm getting at is the devil's in the details. Don't let this argument sway your decision. It's best to have something, but this should not be a factor. The other thing is, one of the people there who was in the search and rescue industry said, I've never gone on one of those personal locator beacon things that was a true alarm. Okay. So you're the opinion that if it didn't happen to you, it doesn't happen at all. And ACR can give you volumes of reports of activations that were actually rescues. So I always hate the argument, well, the inferred argument, if I've never seen it, then it's not true. Okay.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I can't see oxygen molecules, but I know they're out there because people smarter than me have told me that they are, and here I am breathing. So kind of hate when I hear that if I haven't seen it, it's not true kind of argument. Anyway, a long way of saying, and I'm not here to say I'm right or wrong. The device you pick is your choice. Just have something. It's not your cell phone, and it should not be your iPhone 14. That should be your third tier backup to have something. Again, better than nothing at all, but understand it has very strict limits. But again, it boils down to when you're looking at these things and you see a statistic that 98% of those activations are false alarm, that's not really the case. We don't really know what the number is, and you certainly don't know what the other company is not telling you. And trust me, I think if they were only reporting a 50% false alarm rate, they'd be blaring that all over the place. I don't think it's any better than anything else. I just think they're taking advantage of a required government agency releasing statistics, even if they're incomplete statistics, and using it to their advantage. And that really set me off. And I told the company I wasn't going to feature their product on my podcast or in a column. And I left the discussion with a bad taste in my mouth because I thought that you had one guy representing a company endorsing his product. And again, nothing wrong with his product. That's okay. He was what he was there for. But you had something else representing a public entity also endorsing his product. And I thought that was kind of improper too. Just my 2 cents worth.
Yeah, and I thought about getting a Garmin inReach because there was a hike I was on with friends who had one, and they were able to look up the weather in the area because we heard like it was a blue sky, sunny day, but we heard thunder, and so we were like, okay, is this going to be close by? Should we start going down now instead of like enjoying our time at the Alpine Lake? And we were able to look up that the storm was like further like in the Boulder area. I don't know how they work. I just know you use their cell phone to connect with them and stuff, but my friends were able to find out where the storm was. So I think that stuff is valuable, but I totally agree that a company trying to do a third party connection with another company that is saying like, oh no, we'll do these other things and stuff. That's just trying to make you spend more money that you don't need to spend, because if you have a personal locator beacon which doesn't have features of inReach and all that, but it's just there to like, if you get injured or stuck or whatever, you press a button. Also, I question the accidental locator beacon things, because the one I have, you have to like flip open a little door or a cage or whatever in order to press the button. And I think you have to press the button for like 5 seconds or something. Like there's safety features involved that prevent accidental activations.
That's why I was skeptical of that data, whether it applied to personal locator beacons. Now, things that are shipboard, there's all kinds of things that can go wrong. They're designed to, like, they have switches in them that if the thing gets flipped over and then the ship capsizes, that sets off an alarm. Well, somebody could knock one off its mount on the ship and cause it to go off. They're designed to go off if they get wet. So that could be something that accidentally happens. Again, I'm not saying that any of these devices are bad or good. I made a personal decision that, like you, all I want is when I hit a button, somebody's coming. I'm not interested in messaging. I'm not interested in paying a fee on top of having bought the device. I'd rather have the same system that airplanes use and ships at sea use to notify somebody that they need help. I'd rather use that than a privately run company. That's just my personal opinion. Friends of mine I know have inReaches. They love them. And you know what? You have something that people are going to call for help. I may even change my opinion on this in a couple of years when it's time for me to buy a new battery for this one. I may decide, you know what? I kind of like the idea that I can be more specific about what's going on. As a first responder, the more information you have when you get called to go out, the better it is. If I know that you are setting off your device because you have a broken leg and are going to need to be carried out, that's a whole lot different set of equipment and manpower I'm going to send than if I'm lost and I need help getting out of here. Because one might be a 10-person response because they're just going to go carry you out. One might be 100 people response because we need to do a big search operation. There's a lot of differences in there. So I get that there's something to be said about the messaging feature, whether you want to afford it or not. So that's what the difference is to me about the devices. Again, it's more important to have something. I just didn't like that they were using this broad statistic to say that that's why your device syncs, and they're not revealing how many of their devices have false alarm. Again, they're more than likely user error. They could be user error. I mean, mine has a test feature on it, but if you do the test wrong, it could send out a signal. But that's why they call you and say, hey, are you okay? And if you answer the phone and say, hey, sorry about that, guys, I screwed up, I hit the button, you're okay. So anyway, kind of my 2 cents worth there.
I will say I will give kudos to Garmin, because the last I heard of, you can pick a month-to-month subscription. So I have friends who have the Garmin inReach, and if they're going to do a backpacking trip or something, they'll pay a subscription for that month. So you're not stuck in a year-to-year thing or whatever, which I think is great. But yeah, that's my little kudos to Garmin. But for now, I'm fine with my basic emergency locator beacon. So
as long as you have something, somebody can find you. That's the message I really want to get out to people. Is you should have, if you're going to be backcountry, or even you don't have to be too far backcountry, you should have some backup communications method, because as we've talked about before, your cell phone will fail you when you need it the most.
Oh yeah.
I was talking to somebody the other day and I said, yeah, I had my iPod in my pocket and I was listening to a podcast. So I was saying, you still have an iPod. Why don't you listen to it on your phone? I said, for the same reason that I carry a separate GPS instead of using my phone. I don't want everything relying on one device. And while I'm listening to a podcast on my phone, that's
Yep.
draining the battery on that phone that I may need to help get me out of a situation. That's why I carry a separate GPS. So I'm not using my GPS and my cell phone to guide me. I'm using a device that's designed for that, that's much more sensitive, has a better map, and will last days on a charge instead of about 12 hours on a charge. All these reasons why I carry separate devices. But that's me. I get that that's also more weight, it's more expense. I understand all of that. But I'm like what you want to call a professional at this, and it's incumbent on me to have the best equipment. And so that's why I do it. I get that that's not for everybody, but that's one of the reasons why I like dedicated devices for some things. I get the appeal of having everything in one thing, but you have to understand that there are definitely shortcomings to doing that. Advantages, yes, one device, everything's in it. Shortcoming is one device, everything's in it. If it goes south, you lost everything you have. So,
Exactly.
that's why I still carry paper maps, for crying out loud. Anyway, Kevin, I think we beat that to a death.
Yeah. I just want to say real
Sure.
quick, even here in Red Rock Canyon open space, the last time I hiked in there, there's new trail reroutes that have been made. And that is not on the maps that I've got on my watch or my phone or like on Onyx, on All Trails or so yeah, it's important to have multiple things to look at.
Yeah, and there's actually, and I featured this in the newsletter this week, there's actually another trail reroute coming on the Palmer Red Rock Trail, where it comes off the trailhead on Gold Camp Road on section 16.
Oh, really?
The very
Okay.
beginning of it, it kind of goes left, right. Anyway, it makes a couple of switchbacks. They're extending those switchbacks out a little bit. That's going to be a project it's not going to close the existing trail. They'll close it when they build the new one, so you can still use the existing trail. But it's also part of crew leader training. So crew leader training, I was a crew leader for a while, are trained to build trails and maintain trails. So it's and you have to do so much work before you get certified after you do your class. So this is the crew leader training, is to build this trail reroute.
Okay.
So that's not going to be on a map for a while, and it has to be submitted to all the different apps and get caught up and everything. So all these things take a little while to happen. While we're talking about our city parks, a couple of important things coming up, and one of which is that the City Parks Department, how do you like that segue? Was that a pretty good segue? One of the important things coming up is that the City Parks Department, Colorado Springs Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Services, is undertaking a citywide, system-wide master plan, which means that the whole plan for everything, park, trails, whatever related in the city, is being master planned. The last time this was done was in 2014, was when the master plan was finished. It started almost 2 years before that. It took a while to get done. I remember being, I want to say, involved in that. I participated, and I wasn't on any board or commission, had really much to do with it. I was over at Friends of Cheyenne Canyon, so we had a little bit to do with it from that group. But in any case, that is going on right now. Park System Master Plan is getting started up. There's going to be public meetings about that. There's going to be a lot of activity surrounding that. This is a very important thing because it guides what the Parks Department is going to do for the next 10, 12 years as far as what gets developed, where the priorities go. There's a lot going on with that. So I think this is something everybody should probably stay informed about and be involved in. There's a link in my newsletter. I'll put a link in the show notes here, but definitely you should sign up for the newsletter, because then you'll know about all the public engagement and, when there's chances for public input and reviews. There's going to be a lot going on with this. It takes a while to do this. This is very comprehensive. When this was done 10 years ago, the city was a lot smaller than it is now, with a lot fewer properties. We bought a lot of properties. In my six years at the TOPS Working Committee, we bought a lot of property. All of that is new that has to be included in the master plan. So this is a very important thing I think people need to pay attention to, and this is your chance to really guide what the Parks Department does for the next decade, dozen years from now. Be aware of that. I will say, when the first one, well, I should say the first one, when the 2014 one was done, the opinion of our elected officials was not as positive about parks as it is now. And that has changed quite a bit. So that has changed a bit. Well, I just got a message from Kevin. Kevin disappeared off the podcast. I got a message from Kevin that he lost power at his house and he got disconnected. I think we were pretty much wrapping up anyway. So folks, thanks for listening. If you saw the little short podcast I did last week when I announced when my column got picked up by the Bulletin, I did a short podcast, a couple of minutes long. You may see some of those come up because we do this podcast twice a month. And so if there's an intervening week, I may throw in a short one in there. So kind of keep an eye on that because I hate for it to go too long without something, but I don't necessarily have content to do a full long podcast. So keep an eye on those. And with that, on behalf of myself and Kevin, thanks for listening to the Outdoors with Ike and Bob podcast, and we'll talk to you next time.